Hello, welcome everybody to today's webinar of Ghent Workgroup around processing steps test suite. I'm Frank Vyncke. I'm the developer manager of hybrid software, and I'm hosting this webinar today because I contributed a lot to this test suite, and as such, it makes sense that I present it to you all. Actually, the presentation is divided into sections. The first section is really about how to use the processing steps test suite that was developed in the Ghent Workgroup for the last 2 years and is presented or released last month. And after that, I want to show you a few quick examples that show you how processing steps simplify your work and workflow, perhaps in a way that you currently did not yet envisioned. But to start off this seminar and to make it a bit interactive, I prepared a question, and later in the presentation there will be other questions. And so, first of all, what's your envisioned usage of processing steps? So from your answers, it's clear that most see the processing steps more as an internal usage tool than as something to use when communications between two companies. That's definitely a good use case, but it's definitely also usable in other situations. So first, a little background. So processing steps, as said, is about exchanging information between components. And with components here, I use a very broad term, but that could be interactive editors, workflow systems, everything that works together to build your work/workflow. And if we are exchanging information, it is very important that all these components interpret the information defined by the processing steps in the same way. Together with that, like with any new technology, you must gain confidence that the whole thing just works. Now, processing steps might not be new if you look at the age of the definition, but it is still a fairly new technology that is taking up slowly but certainly. But in the end, it means to build your confidence that you need testing. So why did we actually make a test suite? Well, you can say, of course, I can make my own test file. But you have to agree that these test files will only be as good as your understanding of the specification. And given that specifications are overall quite hard to read, it probably means that your test files will cover the basics and not really all the ugly details of what should work and what should not work. I can honestly make this statement because it's also true for us. The first iteration contained like 5 test patches, then we had made some more, and in the end we ended with 39 patches to actually be able to test all the stuff instead of just a basic word. So it's really, and we also just make new test patches when we run in a problem and try to test or fix it. So when doing these tests for our internal software, we came to the conclusion that it's probably a tool be usable for everybody. And that's why we created in the Ghent Workgroup a test suite to help you. That was the introduction. Now, first of all, I want to explain you how to use the processing steps test suite. First of all, of course, you need to download it. You can find the test suites on the Ghent Workgroup website under the heading Valuable Content Processing Step Suites. But to highlight it, it's easier to go to the live website. So you see I'm on the Ghent Workgroup website. Here you have Valuable Content Processing Steps Test Suite. If you select that topic, you see the processing step well, a little the explanation and the background of it. And here at the bottom, you have a download link, which will download the zip file that contains all the test patches and some help file, which goes along with it, explaining what can be found in the test suite and how to use it. Now, one of the things I will explain first is how are the patches set up. Just for quick references, I added two patches here, a good one and a bad one. But you see the visual structure of the boat is already quite similar, and that's actually true for all the test patches. You will recognize in each of the test patches three sections. The top section, which is the upper rectangle or surrounded area where you have this little image, these color patches, etc., which normally contains some general setup and information. The middle section is this small black triangle with the gray box in it, which is used to set up some additional processing steps, which are probably needed to create the context for the test. And the actual bottom part, which is not surrounded by a black box, contains the actual test data to trigger a certain situation. To go a bit more in detail about the top section, you first see to the left an image, well, to put an image thing there. The second one is some generic text to have also text outside of the test site, but depending on which test it is, this generic test might be replaced or will be replaced by the actual problem we want to trigger. In the middle, you see some color patches, including some spot colors to just create a device in test file with more than just CMYK data. And on the right top, you see the test patch, the version creation date and the name of the test patch. And look good here, it always ends with a G, an E, or a W, which corresponds to the expected test result, as you can see below. So you have the green box with the word good if we expect that your software gives no problems when opening the test patch, or it's red with the message error if we expect your software to generate some kind of message saying this is I think there is something wrong because of such and such reason. I want to iterate also here when we replace the text big dog wants to play with actual test information. The test info which is there is quite technical, and normally if you run the patch and verify it in your software, you will see that, or we hope that the actual software generates a more human readable text, and I will highlight that in one of the examples I show you further on. What you can also find in the zip file you download is a documentation part, which contains, first of all, also a description of the setup of the patches, just like I explained a little bit. There are some do's and don'ts. Then some explanation of expected processing steps, because during the development, some of the colleagues actually expressed interest to see, well, given that I open a certain patch, which processing steps should I see in my user interface just as a reference to see that they read information correctly. The fourth section contains all the issues that should be found if you run all the test patches and the reason behind it. And the last section is really how to test in an interactive or in a workflow application. So this is the documentation that comes with the test suite. As said first, the section describes the test patches in detail. Then the do's and don'ts a bit. So some of these test patches, if you open them in Acrobat, will not show the full content because in some cases we have to play with rbox and crowbox, and that triggers Acrobat to show or not show certain sections. You should not be alarmed. That's documented here, which open a bit differently in Acrobat than others. A point of interest is why is each patch separate, and that's because these tests all influence each other, and if you will put them all on one file, you can actually not determine why something goes wrong or does not go wrong. So you really have to process each test patch individually to get the correct results. As said, so the processing steps to be found, for example, if you open test patch PS00101G, you should find 3 layers. One called base artwork, which has no processing steps assigned to it. And then the base processing step layer should have a structural punching assigned, etc., etc. But with this information, you can actually clearly verify that if you open your test patch in your editor, whether the editor sees all the correct content. And then here is the list of all the tests where a warning or error is detected and why is it detected. And then at the end, how to use it on interactive systems or on automated systems. I will not go over this in detail here because that's part of what we are presenting is a little bit a demonstration on how to use it. So how do we test our software when it's about an interactive application? It's actually quite simple. You open your application, you open a patch, you either click preflight if it's not preflighted automatically, or if it's an application within an automatic embedded preflight engine, it will automatically run the tests, and you should check the results, which means if it's a good patch, so with the green rectangle or ending in .mg, the patch should not generate any warnings or messages in your application. Or if it's a red one with the error text, you should get at least one error message when you open the patch. And that process you should repeat for all patches. So let's first give you an example of how that works. I will first open 2 patches in Adobe Illustrator where we installed a plugin from BC called Productize. And you can see here to the right that there are several processing steps assigned. And if I run my preflight, I see a green check mark, so it's okay. So this one is approved. Or if I run my preflight on a error patch, I see an error is detected. And the error says here in this case, the layer test processing step should not contain image data, which is the more human readable version of test processing steps. OCG contain image objects, which is according to the specification invalid. So this is how simple it is to test your test patches in an interactive application. So if you run all the test patches and all they rack all as they should be, you can say, well, this tool is compliant with the tests, with the specifications, and I can rely that it reacts correctly when I use processing steps. Similarly, we also did a test with Kala's PDF Toolbox, and if you run a test there, you get very similar behavior. I take my 2 test patches, I drop them on PDF Toolbox. They have a built-in profile, which is called verify compliancy with processing steps, blah, 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 blah. And so it's simple. You select your image, you say analyze, and this is a good patch. It says no problems found. And if you run it on a bad test patch, you see that some errors are reported. And in this case, it says print object overlaps. with processing steps object, which is the more still technical, but still more human readable than the text in the test patch itself. And so again, we tested all the test patches, and if everything reacts as it should be, you can say, well, as PDF toolbox is okay. So that were the typical way of testing in an interactive application. So how would you test in an automated application? So what we suggest is you create, well, depending if it's a purely hot folder based solution, you probably don't have to do much of a setup. But in a workflow system, it might be that you need to build a workflow where the intention is to send good results to a good folder and bad or error results to an error folder. Then you can start your automation by selecting all the patches and to add them to the workflow. And to check your results, you should see that your good result folder should only contain patches ending on G. And the error folder should only contain patches ending with E. Now, in the test suite, there are also some test patches with ending with W, which means it's a warning. A warning are test patches that are testing setups that are valid according to the specifications, but that you might not want. So if your software only supports good or compliant or not compliant, in that case, you expect all the W files to be in your good folder. If there is a warning output, it is up to the vendor to decide whether it considers this thing as a warning or not. So in this case, I will show you a setup for an automated setup based on Cloudflow. What I did was I have a workflow which will first clean out my result folders. I select files, which means I select all the test patches. I have a repeat loop, which will provide or supply each of the individual patches to the analyze node, which goes to success or error. And if it's a good result, it moves it to the good folder. If it's a bad or an error file, it goes to the error folder. In this case, I only provide two patches to make certain that the test doesn't run for more than 5 minutes to show you the results. If I go to the website, to the folders associated with this workflow, this is my input folder here. And you see that my error patch 00104 error is routed to the error folder, and the good one is routed to the good folder. So it means that here in the error folder, you should only find files ending with E. So so the only thing I selected in the analyze node in this case was the fact that the file should be process step compliant. But of course, this is just your basic thing to check for processing steps. And in your real life production, you can add additional steps if you want to. Same deal, if all the patches go where you want them to go, you know that your workflow tool will react correctly on your processing steps. Now, I want to make clear in this here that the three tools I showed you are just some of the tools I use on a daily basis, and hence I use them to demonstrate how to use the test suite. But I do know that there are a lot more compliant applications out there, and so you should definitely not look at the showed applications as the definitive list of tools that work correctly. There is a lot more correct tools out there. So this part was about to present you the tools to verify your workflow so that everything works together. The second part of this presentation will actually now document, or I will highlight some of the points where processing steps might simplify your workflow. And some of these things might, well, not be surprising, but still you do not always think about them when you think about processing steps. Process your artwork. Now, yeah, if you have editors, let's call them really what they are. And if they support processing steps, well, they might actually help you in creating good artwork files without or with less knowledge from the operator, so that he knows all the intricate details of how to make a good PDF file. And so you can open your file, assign processing steps, and then you do your pre-flight, which will report what was good, what was bad. Well, it will report what was bad. And in a lot of cases, it will also be able to do some automatic fixing, so that, well, you click on fix everything and your file will be 99% ready, instead of you having to move files or object to other layers, assign the correct spot colors, do whatever you need to do. So it's actually a lot quicker to do it like that, and your result files will be a lot more reliable. For example, so in this case, I have a file which is already, well, it's already layered. But for one, it's layered with French layer names, and it's not that I speak French, but it illustrates very nicely that processing steps in the end do not matter what the layer names are. So a French company can still name its layers in French, a German company can name its layers in German, but the processing steps themselves, they are language independent and will just work. So for example, in this case, I will assign a structural cutting to the decoupage layer, a structural embossing for the gaufrage, structural foil stamping for feuille et fenêtre. That's actually also still cutting. So it's actually as easy as that to assign your special processing information to your layers. And now just see how good did I, or I did quite badly, because on each layer there is a mistake. There's a lot of mistakes here, a lot of mistakes here, but basically I can say fix all. And if I now pre-flight, it's okay. You might now say that, well, yes, the file doesn't look the same anymore. Well, that's to be expected, because this is actually CAT data. And what do we need to make it certain that the file processes correctly? That data should be an overprint, and hence it will only appear as something dark on top of the background. But that's correct. The embossing, the automatic tool just put it in a separate layer and assigned the correct spot color on it, but it didn't know which spot color to use. But if you want to change it to another color, feel free, it's possible, as long as your layer metadata is correct. The instructions will work, and they don't rely on layer name, neither spot color name. So that's what makes it so reliable and easy to use. So this is just an example of what it means to assign your processing steps. If I would ask you, do processing steps influence your color conversions? What do you say? No, it doesn't matter at all? Or yes, I will have to configure my software differently? Or do you think that the setup is far simpler and the result will be more reliable? Interesting. 60% of you think that your color conversions are not influenced by processing steps. That's actually a very interesting result. So what I will explain you is actually that it's becomes a lot simpler to do color conversions if you assign your processing steps. So I will give you an example. So in the previous example, we had a design which has several technical objects like the CAD information or the foil. And what do we need to do to prevent that these technical objects interact with your color conversions with print content, which means they should not be blended in your print content because it's not print content, or similar, how do we actually prevent them from being converted? For this, I will actually open up the ColorLogic Zebra application, and I'll show you what your configuration should be depending on how you work. So either you say, oh yeah, that's all not a problem for me. I always use pot colors and with specific names. So and those should be controlled correctly. So what you typically do is you set up a conversion in all your configurations, and you have a list there of all spot colors and what should happen to it. And yeah, in this example, for example, varnish and white should not be converted. But what happens if you have a French customer who will probably use blanc or vernis as name? And what do you have to do for your structural information, which might be die line, die cut, or your French customer might be using decoupage? Just to show you, it's a long list to maintain. And if some new customer comes along and if he uses a different setup, you have to add a list, and depending on how many configurations you have to have it, you have to use it everywhere. So it's a bit of, well, it's not a bit, it's a lot of work to maintain this correctly. Similar, if you do by layer names, well, in that case, you have to go to there and you set up your similar or same list again of all the layers not to convert. But what if you use processing steps? Well, in Smart Colors, in Zebra here, but there are other tools out there which work very similar. You just select one checkbox which says processing steps don't convert. And this actually means that all your files that come in that have certain layers correctly marked as being processing steps, they will not be converted. And that means two things. They will stay there as their individual layers for future use as individual items, and they will definitely not interact with your print content because the software knows to correctly and always ignore them while converting colors. So these are the two examples I show you. So basically, instead of configuring an endless list of changing colorants or changing layers, you can now simply select in your color conversion tools to ignore processing steps. Personally, I think that's a lot simpler. I don't know about you, but it would definitely work for me. Next question. It's very similar to the previous one, but do processing steps influence your pre-flight setup? Aha. I see people already moving into the direction that processing steps can help you. Okay, thanks. So let's give you some examples. So suppose you want a pre-flight for small text, but your operators also have to have dimensions on your file which explain which panels have to be a certain size. Now, we should definitely not include the text of the dimensions there. There are tricks to perhaps do it, but in essence, it should simply ignore your dimensions. Or similar, if you want to pre-flight that your printed document only contains CMYK images or images with certain attached profiles. But what if your legend that you put on your artwork contains an RGB company logo? How do you exclude that? If you use processing steps or not, you might not need to list all acceptable spot colors. You can only focus on the spot colors that you will print instead of everything around it. I'll show you this in PDF Toolbox, and actually I was not able to make a profile in PDF Toolbox that ignores all the text on specific layers, but I asked a specialist from Callas itself, and he made me this profile. Well, yes, this profile, it says text is too small, but I only want to check it if it's not on the side. Well, it should be side panel, but that's not the detail. So what does it mean if I open this test? First of all, it's indeed testing on the side, but then I include another check which says object isn't on the side panel or dimensions, which is a test which checks out it's not on a specific layer, and here you have a list of layers to ignore and to maintain. So I think you can all agree it's not really the simplest thing to set up if you want to not check small text on a dimension layer. Well, there is an alternative, and the alternative is simply for PDF Toolbox, you can choose here to exclude all objects which are on a processing step layer. So instead of finicking with all these additional tests and lists of layers to maintain, you can just say exclude all processing steps, done. So instead of a multi-level check setup, it becomes a single additional check you enable saying exclude processing steps objects, and you will have something that ignores all the text that is not relevant for your print content. Do processing steps for you, does it help you to manage your reprints? The majority thinks it helps. Well, I personally also think it helps. So basically the question is, so you need to reprint a job 6 months or whatever after the first print. Now that actually means you also need to find the related special instructions that go with the file or with the initial file. And then you have to re-enter whatever instructions there were when you launch the reprint. Now, with processing steps, the information about, or at least the intent is also stored in the file, meaning you know exactly what is structural cutting, you know what was intended to be embossing, you know what your varnish was and everything. So you don't need to re-specify this, and you also do not need to re-enter that in your setup because it's embedded in the file and your system can read it from the file. So the chances of reproducing or making errors in your reprint become less because you always have the instructions at hand. The job is correctly set up because it was embedded, and even change prepress workflows, meaning if the list of accepted colorants has changed, etc., is not influenced because it's always a very clear setup saying do this on processing steps or don't do this on processing steps. So it's always clearly configured, and the chances of something going wrong is a lot lower, in my personal opinion. And that was what I wanted to present you today. Okay, then I would like to thank you for your attendance, and I hope I gave you some useful insights. And, well, I also hope that these test patches will help you to set up your workflow in the future. If you have questions, you can reach us. You can reach me directly at frankv@hybridsoftware.com, or you can send an email through at the Ghent Workgroup, which will be forwarded to me. Thank you, and see you next time.